decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Welcome to a special edition of the McLaughlin Group. I'm Tom Rogan, your host. Joining us today are Pat Buchanan, Eleanor Clift, Clarence Page, and Emily Jashinsky. Obviously, because of circumstances in the nation and around the world, with the national emergency as produced by the coronavirus, we're doing this show a little bit differently from usual. But we hope that you will appreciate the consideration of these very important issues that hopefully we can bring to bear today. And we also want to say to all of you, whether you be well or ill, we are thinking of you. We are grateful for your support as our fans. And together as a country, I'm sure we will come out of this stronger. Anyway, enough from me. Let's get on to our first issue, which is issue 1, national emergency.
And I watched the doctors and the nurses walking into that hospital this morning. It's like military people going into battle, going into war. The bravery is incredible.
The president sought to boost public confidence this week as the coronavirus pandemic spread across America. Still, the White House is assessing that 200,000 deaths may be a low estimate for the casualties to come. And with a vaccine not expected to be available until mid-2021, the world is settling in for the long haul. One big question: how long can the lockdown underway in many states and cities last without causing irrevocable economic and social harm?
Okay, Pat, why don't you start us off? How do you see the president's handling of this crisis as he has seen to develop towards a more concerned posture and move away from perhaps reopening the economy as he had suggested he wanted to do just a little bit a while ago?
Well, basically, Tom, I think the president was clearly, he knew about the issue. I think he's moved without all deliberate speed, but I think he's doing an excellent job now. Everyone's aware of how things are going. I think the country's doing well in terms of folks sheltering in place. I think it's going to endure. My concern is if we move through April and May without flattening that curve, you're going to see a lot of Americans adopt sort of the spirit of spring break, if you will, and really start coming out of their homes before they should do it. But I'm hopeful. I think we got a good team there. There's no doubt that we started without masks, without gowns, with an insufficient number of ventilators and respirators. But I think we're all moving together, and frankly, I'm pretty hopeful now.
Eleanor?
Well, I think the president's briefing on Wednesday this week, or maybe it was Tuesday, the days kind of crowd together, where he basically announced that we're in for a rough couple of months. And he apparently has listened to the Corona Task Force, the public health officials that serve on it, and he has looked at the numbers. And he basically said that the best case scenario would be 100,000 lives lost, worst case 240,000, but without the mitigation and the staying in place that now most of the country is under, there could be millions of deaths. I cannot give him an A grade for how he's handled this. I think he's been late to it. We lost a couple of weeks, if not a month, at the beginning of the year when he and his allies were calling this a hoax and downplaying it. And he still is reluctant to put the full weight of the federal government behind the supply lines. I mean, why he doesn't, he has Peter Navarro, who is a professor who specializes in trade, heading up the supply demands. And the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, said he needs to put a general in there. It reminds me of during the Katrina horror during the Bush administration, General Honore came in there and really managed to instill confidence and efficiency. And I don't think we're seeing that yet from the national government, although Trump has come a long way from the days when he was saying that this was a made-up issue.
Clarence, do you want to jump in there?
Well, yeah, I certainly agree with Eleanor in that there's a difference now between the Trump we see now and the Trump we saw initially, who did try to talk down the whole, but it was now clearly a crisis for the United States as well as the countries that it hit earlier, including China. And at the same time, he's getting a lot of latitude from the public because we're looking for a good leader. We need a good leader right now. I think a better leader than him He gave himself a 10 a week ago. I'd give him a 5 at best. But this week he sounded like he really had a better grasp of the great depth and breadth of the problem. He was more somber beginning of the week, a much better mood that he put forth. He's kept Anthony Fauci, despite rumors about Fauci being in trouble for being candid. Fauci does have the credibility that the president lacks when it comes to the technical side, and the president still insists on pushing a drug that is not approved, has not been subject to thorough scientific study. But nevertheless, he's not getting in the way of Fauci. He's just they're both kind of carving out areas of agreement to emphasize. And everything is kind of loping along. One area that, a bunch of people who need some credit are the governors. The governors have picked up the slack, particularly in states like Maryland, the Republican governor there, New York, California, Illinois. And that is making a difference on the ground. But again, there's an area, a relationship with the governors that the president has been too political about.
Do you think as well, Emily, though, that part of the president's evolution here seems to have been that, he was he's been skeptical of technocrats, of what he would call the deep state, the experts, we might say, or, whatever. He would obviously have a different interpretation. But as he has sort of looked at more of the data, he has stepped up to the plate and he has made decisions, quite frankly, that go against his gut. And we should credit him for that, no?
Well, I do think he's had a good week. I think he's had roughly a good couple of weeks with some moments here or there that he probably should take back. But at the same time, I think to your question, what's important is that the data itself has evolved. We heard Dr. Birx say just this week that the initial data China was providing made this outbreak look more like SARS than what we're seeing right now. And so as the data itself has evolved, I think the government's response has evolved. I think Eleanor used a word I want to key in on, and that's efficiency, because we're now at a point where the spring breakers are largely off the beaches. And we're dealing not only with containing the outbreak on the medical side, but the economics. In the past 2 weeks, we've had 10 million people apply with jobless claims. 10 million people. We don't fully understand what the economic ramifications of this pandemic are going to be yet, but we do know that based on the legislation that was rushed through Congress, with some delays, actually rushed with some delays, it's a funny kind of phrase, but we do know that that legislation is going to result in people perhaps not getting checks for as late as 5 weeks from now. That is not efficient, and that some of the fault for that does certainly lie with the president, but it lies in the inefficiencies of Congress ultimately.
We wish, I know Eleanor and Clarence wish we had a different commander-in-chief, wish we had a different president, but he's the one we have now. And as Lincoln said, they have a right to criticize who have a heart to help. We are all in this together. America was unprepared, the world was unprepared, Britain was unprepared, China handled it horribly, but we're all in this together, supporting the president. I think he's moving in the right way. He needs advice and counsel, he's getting it. I think the 2 doctors up there he's got are excellent. And the key thing is, the American people are voting their vote of confidence in the president. His poll rating is at 49%, 60% approval for how he's handling this. And I think mainly the media, which is the only institution which is underwater for its performance in the polls, really ought to say, in effect, look, we got some ideas we'd like to contribute, but we're all in this and we hope Donald Trump and the country succeed.
I'd like to say something, Pat. I don't like the insinuation that somehow we want this president to fail. I want this president to succeed as much as you do.
Okay, let's get to issue 2, calculating China.
这个女神都往这边走，男同志，女神站前面2排。
Chinese state media this week celebrated the return to their home cities of doctors stationed at the center of the coronavirus outbreak in Hubei province. The carefully choreographed propaganda reflects the growing global debate over how well China has handled the coronavirus crisis. Beijing insists it did everything possible to constrain the epidemic and adds that it has provided invaluable support to foreign populations in need. But while China has indeed sent medical and support teams around the world, it has also hoarded medical equipment and, as with a recent deal with Spain, a deal with hundreds of millions of dollars, sold inferior equipment abroad. And others, notably Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, say that China concealed relevant data on the early days of the coronavirus outbreak last December and in early January.
Clarence, why don't you start us off on this, and then I'll go to Emily because I didn't give her enough time in the last issue. But Clarence, how do you see China's performance both in the early days of December and January when the outbreak in Wuhan and Hubei province first occurred, and also China's response in terms of provision of aid, some of it inadequate in terms of quality, to the international community now?
Well, like President Trump, the Chinese leadership was reluctant to acknowledge that they had a real problem here with the virus, to the point of suppressing and even jailing one doctor who was one of the early whistleblowers on this. They obviously did a 180. And now I think that we look and see what they have done. We see that they've done some positive things for us to imitate or emulate. But also, we still can't trust their numbers. I mean, just because of their reputation is such that when they give numbers that tell us that the United States now has more casualties than they do, it's hard to believe them. It may be true, but again, that's a typical ongoing problem in dealing with China. But they're dealing with this problem well now, partly because they've had experience with similar flu outbreaks in the past.
Emily, do you want to jump in there?
Yes, absolutely. As Clarence mentioned, early in the early days of this outbreak, China censored and jailed doctors. They let 5 million people leave Wuhan. 5 million people. It took them 7 weeks to really start taking action. And in that time, the outbreak was able to spread within Wuhan and out because it was so porous with 5 million people leaving. We're already seeing the results of their cover-up right now because Dr. Birx is, as she said this week, the data that they passed out worldwide showed this being on a much lower scale, much smaller scale. And not only that, China is currently deflecting and calling the United States racist and waging a propaganda campaign to blame us for this outbreak. And by the way, it's particularly rich to be called racist by a country that jails and has camps for ethnic minority Muslims. So China has handled this atrociously. The cover-up is incontrovertible at this point. It costs American lives, it costs American jobs, and it costs American businesses. And the way that we handle it after the fog of war settles is going to be absolutely crucial.
Eleanor, do you want to come in?
They behaved reprehensibly, and they deserve all the criticism they're getting for that. And in fact, there's even been some discussion that countries could sue China for reparations because they allowed basically a localized virus to escape, and then they covered it up. But having said that, we're accustomed to dealing with regimes, and they call it in the foreign policy world, it's bifurcation. They have what's going on the one hand is despicable, on the other hand, they know a lot. They did share what's known about, I don't know if I'm using the right language, the DNA of this virus early on. They are now supplying masks. I think masks arrived in New York from China. They are sending their medical people around the world to help. And, as Pat said earlier, we're all in this together, and that includes China, and they are now extending a helping hand. And they did learn something, and they apparently have been successful in tamping down this virus because they are opening Wuhan, and commerce is taking place. They may be in for a second wave after you lift the restrictions on people, but they have something to teach us now, and we need to understand that.
I'm not sure that the Communist Party of China has a great deal to teach the United States, except how the Communist parties really behave. In the Chinese language, we used to say back in the days when he was going to China, the character for crisis is split into two characters. One says crisis, and one says opportunity, the other says danger. What the Chinese did was criminally irresponsible at the beginning of the Wuhan flu, as it's known, or the Hubei province flu, in covering it up. Since then, they have sought to, as a Communist Party will, to maximize their advantage from it by sending these provisions all over the world to something like 80 or even more than 100 countries. I think there's no doubt they're trying to use this as an opportunity to displace the United States as the leader of the world in a world crisis. And in that sense, they're being very effective in what they're doing and trying to do, and they are making quasi-friends around the world from what they're trying to do.
Who Who wants to jump in here on any of those points?
I agree with Pat, and they are taking advantage of the openings that they see, and they're trying to clean up what would otherwise be a massive public relations disaster for them, and they're having some success in doing that.
Clarence, do you think there is going to be any prospect of a shift in terms of the narrative on China towards much greater scrutiny of the regime on issues beyond this, whether that be their commitment to carbon reduction and climate change, where there's some doubts, significant doubts about statistics? Do you think this is going to alter how we see China, how we address China beyond coronavirus?
Well, I think we could certainly see the division in China between the political side, as Pat was referring to, the Communist Party leadership, and their scientific community, which has had some significant breakthroughs, but they're running into the lack of freedom, academic freedom, press freedom, freedom of expression. That gets in the way of research. It gets in the way of commerce. In the past, they've constantly had to dance around that with a system which is essentially, as I've said before, not really communist, but it's state capitalism, where the state tries to control the system as much as possible while they allow profits to be made. And that's the kind of a system that can, as I say, be very inefficient.
Okay.
There's a mad dash to find a vaccine, and they could well be first.
Yeah.
But there's really this
and
really
I would also
demonstrates.
I would also like to mention President Trump really values his relationship with the president of China, President Xi, and the president, he has stopped calling the virus the Chinese virus. And so, I mean, I actually think it's a good thing that he's got a good relationship.
All right.
But
All
I
right.
think, wait a minute, Tom. There's one point I want to make.
Okay.
Absurdity of the United States in the 1990s and early 2000s, for which Republicans, as well as Clinton Democrats and others, are responsible, of beginning to rely upon China for the vital necessities of our national life and our personal survival, drugs, prescriptions, medicines, vital elements of your defense weapons, and the other things. I think there's going to be a national debate on whether the United States should decouple to a degree the American economy from the Chinese economy as a result of this whole virus thing. And I do think, though, in the short run, we are in this together, but we ought to be thinking about the future.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the third issue. Issue 3, it's an election year.
You have nurses showing up wearing garbage bags as over their bodies as protection.
Where are the masks going? Are they going out the back door?
We need to get them the help they need right away.
Our message is to all Americans, we love them, we're with them, and we will not let them down.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
The Trump and Biden presidential campaigns offer very different narratives of President Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. But Trump looks to have won some favor from the American people. Gallup's most recent polling data suggests the president's approval rating has risen 5 points to 49%.
Okay, Emily, in terms of Joe Biden's campaign narrative and President Trump's campaign narrative in terms of the coronavirus, what qualities both men believe they could bring to the table, how do you see this electorally at the moment? Because again, it's out of our minds in many ways, but we are in an election year and we're getting closer to a November election day. I mean, how do you see this playing out with Biden and Trump?
Yeah, apparently. I mean, who could remember? But it's actually a really serious point, because this is going to hinge on two very huge uncertainties right now, enormous uncertainties. The first of which is how many lives are tragically lost. And the second of which is what this does to the economy. And that's going to be very important for President Trump to deal with. One interesting thing that's happened is as the president's approval rating has climbed a little bit in the past week, he's moving the needle with independents. That is bad news for Joe Biden. And so if we were really close to the election right now, that you could look at this as sort of going really well for Donald Trump in terms of electoral politics. But at the same time, remember that, and Dr. Fauci has said this, all of the experts have said this, we expect this to resurge again in the fall. And the election is the first week of November. So that could be a huge factor in addition to all of the unknowns in terms of that final number of lives and what happens really to the economy. So right now it's just so hard to say, but we do know this is going to be a presidential election like none other. We can know that at least.
Well, the Democrats have moved their convention to August 17. I guess there's still some hope they might, from July, some hope they might get together. But there's this little boomlet to draft Governor Cuomo for president because Democrats like his leadership and they think he can really take it to Trump. That's not going to happen. He's not in the race. So Biden is well ahead. But Biden needs Bernie Sanders to get out of the race so that he can proceed, can name a running mate, and he doesn't have to do it this month. And I think the fact that he's basically gone quiet, I mean, he's doing some interviews and he basically tells the host, thank you for having me on so people can know where I am. He's in his basement in Delaware. There's time for him to emerge, and the election will be a referendum on the president and his leadership on the coronavirus principally.
You know, that I agree with Eleanor that the election is going to be about how Donald Trump handles the coronavirus. And if he's seen to have led the country successfully through the crisis, I don't see how Joe Biden beats him. Biden, for the last month, you got to realize exactly 1 month ago today, Biden won the greatest victory of his career, 10 out of 14 states on Super Tuesday. Since then, he's been sheltering in place. And when he emerges on these Skypes, he's wandering around like he's lost in his basement. And it is not a vision that is really dramatic for the American people. He's been replaced by Cuomo because whether you agree or disagree with what Cuomo's saying, he's out there talking and speaking and leading. And I think if Biden doesn't do that, he's getting closer and closer in the polls with Trump losing his lead. I honestly believe, and it'll be my prediction, Tom, that Biden may get the convention, but the Democratic Party, that the folks that control the party, are going to take a second look at Joe, especially the lapses in memory, lapses in mental acuity, and see if he can really handle it in the debates.
All right,
well,
Clarence.
Thanks for building up the gate. Thanks for building up the gate for the debates, Pat, because this reminds me of, what was it, 8 years ago, 10 years ago now, since Biden debated Sarah Palin. And I was hearing the same things going into it, that, hey, Sarah Palin's a really attractive candidate and Joe Biden's not as sharp as he used to be. I mean, that's what's going to really tell the tale in the fall. Number two, Democrats can take some hope from the fact that all that President Trump has got going for him right now, he still hasn't risen above 50% in the polls. He's still, and that's a record low since polling began for a president, especially a successful president in as much as he's been successful.
Clarence, he wasn't at 50% when he beat Hillary.
Let Clarence finish, and then I'll come back to you, Pat. Clarence, continue.
You have a question, Pat?
No, he wasn't at 50% when he beat Hillary. This is an electoral college game.
Yes.
And I said, one latest poll I saw that Biden was 2 points ahead of Trump. If that's the case, he's going to lose the election.
Well, Hillary beat.
But
Hillary lost Wisconsin and Michigan, Pat.
Let me see your point,
Biden to lose Michigan. I can see where you're finding help in that regard.
All right,
Clarence, you're right. Biden won the debate. I'm not sure with Sarah Palin. She was terrific. But he won the debate with Paul Ryan. There's no doubt about it. That's 2012. But that is not the same Joe Biden we see. Do you think he's as sharp and quick and witty as he used to be, and good old Joe when you see him on television?
I agree he's out of training, and yet he is good old Joe. He's very familiar with the voters. That's why I don't see Cuomo getting anywhere right now in the future. But right now, I think it's going to be a contest.
I agree. It's going to be a contest, and I would just ask one question. Has an incumbent president ever been reelected in a recession/depression? Just asking.
Emily, on that note, any other thoughts on this sort of political situation we find ourselves in now? Very hard to predict.
I agree strongly with Pat that Biden is going to struggle, I think, to project the strength that voters want to see in a crisis. I think that's definitely something to watch. I do think his videos have not been successfully projecting that level of strength that people want to see. I think, it's not good to, and to some extent it is good for Joe Biden to not be out in front of crowds, but he can't even stage the kind of publicity that he wants at this point. We'll see how long it lasts. But I do think if he does continue to bumble and fumble his way through the campaign. People are going to be looking for a strong leader. And I think, love him or hate Donald Trump, he has projected the image of a leader by having these daily task force briefings, coming out strong. So I think there could be a contrast issue for Biden.
Well, where's he leading us? That's the question.
That's excellent. If Biden were to get out and ignore the orders that everybody else is following, just to satisfy your need for strength, I think that would backfire. This is not the time for him to be out there. There is time after we get through this very cruelest month.
So let's go to our, or at least some of our fans' favorite moment of the show, predictions. Okay, so predictions, Pat.
As I predicted, I do think there's going to be an establishment move to replace Joe Biden.
Okay, Eleanor.
I think the president is going to have to hire a general to oversee the supply lines coming out of the White House. And he likes generals. I think he's going to do it.
Maybe Jim Mattis. Emily.
I predict you're going to start seeing the right turn on Dr. Anthony Fauci. I think we saw a little bit of this week. I expect that to escalate in the days ahead.
Interesting. Clarence?
I think we're going to see a future for Zoom TV and the use of this for talk shows.
And I will say that I hope that our fan, Mark Bernstein, who's in the UK, is a fan of the show, unfortunately has coronavirus, but I believe he's doing okay. I hope he gets better. And I predict that at some point soon, hopefully, I will not be surrounded by such an odd aura of light. Anyway, that will be, I think, it for this show. Thank you very much for watching. We appreciate it.